Hi friends, Stephanie here. Today I want to share with you something that is close to my heart, and it is why I don't teach my kids healthy versus unhealthy food. This is a personal story, one rooted in how I grew up and how I've completely had to rewire how I think of food and my relationship with it, as well as my body and nourishment. I grew up in an environment in the early 90s where everything was low fat, no fat, reduced fat, and it created this huge fear around fat or becoming fat. So I had this completely abnormal relationship with food growing up and being afraid of it and not realizing the real benefits and the real purpose of food for energy and nourishment. So this led to eating disorders. It led to body dysmorphia, restricting calories, and again, this really just fear-based relationship that I had with fear. It became connected to fear, not something that, again, could be something positive in my life or something that I could even find pleasure or enjoyment in. It wasn't actually until I started my training with my functional nutrition program when I learned the reality of food. You think that I may have learned this in my physician assistant training, but our nutrition curriculum was about 1 hour long. Through my functional nutrition training, I learned the real power of food and using food as medicine and learning that fats will not make you fat. In fact, it's actually quite the opposite, in learning how essential certain foods like healthy fats are for growth and development and sustained energy. So it's taken years to unlearn those beliefs. And I realized that I didn't want my children to inherit those same beliefs and those stories. So whether I am working with a private client or my children or a family member, I find that it's really important to educate on the why something may be a better choice than an alternative, and really explaining it to them at their level what this food is doing to their body, how it's causing inflammation or robbing them of energy or weakening their immune system if they're sick. To that note, also empowering them to connect with themselves, how certain foods make them feel. As much as we strive to eat very clean and healthy, there are times where we go out to eat, or say we're around relatives who maybe don't follow the same dietary guidelines that we do. Really just offering them to get curious on how a certain food makes them feel, whether that's something with gluten or dairy or sugar, and seeing if they can tap into. And 9 times out of 10, they do have some sort of res- response in their body, whether it's maybe I had a sugar crash, or I had a belly ache, or a headache, or I was dizzy. Various things that our children have noted when eating foods that we don't typically eat in our home. An example of this is, so my parents were just here visiting, and one of my daughters went shopping with them, and on the way home they stopped at Starbucks. And there's not much that you would get at Starbucks that doesn't contain a lot of sugar. So she came home with this sugar laden drink, and hours later she was essentially passed out on the couch, like lifeless, couldn't move, complete sugar crash. So I had a conversation with her later, and really I had looked up how many grams of sugar was in it. She was also battling a cold at this time. So I asked her, I said, so how do you feel? She responded, not great. And then I asked her if it was worth it. And she agreed that it probably wasn't the best decision. She did admit that it tasted good, but she was then suffering the consequences, and then, was sick for a few days later, something that may have been prevented had that beverage not been consumed. So instead of shaming and judging it, just getting curious and bringing it back to educating on the why and empowering them next time to choose differently, knowing what had happened, in the current example that I just gave. For me, that relearning nourishment really changed how I felt in my body. And what really mattered to me was what I was passing on to my kids. And I didn't want them to have that same fear of food their entire adolescence, because one day they're not going to be living here in our home and they'll be making choices on their own. So instead of having very strict guidelines, healthy versus unhealthy, I really strive to teach body awareness so that we are raising intuitive eaters. They're learning trust and discernment, not fear. And we're really equipping them for adulthood by not controlling every choice. Certainly, I hope that when they leave our home, they continue to live about the way that we have raised them. But I can't guarantee what they do when they leave the nest here. All I know is what I've done on my role to educate and empower them with the tools necessary to make the best decisions that they can. Healing my relationship with food has been one of the deepest parts of my motherhood journey. And it's really not about perfection, it's about awareness and presence. I'm curious, what messages did you have around food growing up in your family? And how are you trying to rewrite those stories now for your own family? Thank you so much for being here, friends. We share a new video every week on conscious living, family, and healing. If this resonated, please hit subscribe. We'd love for you to join the Conscious Crew.